So for those of you who don't know me, a little bit about myself. I was born around a 10-minute walking distance from the US-Mexico border in El Paso, Texas, almost 63 years ago. As many of you, I benefited greatly from attending Catholic schools run by the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word, the Christian Brothers, and the Jesuits. I went to these schools until the age of 22. Little did I realize how much, after my family, they would shape me, especially in terms of this very dialogue of faith and culture. As a Jesuit since that time, I have lived in Louisiana, Texas, Florida, and California, not to mention Mexico, Italy, and the Philippines as a student, high school teacher, priest, and professor. I must say, as I look back, it's been quite an adventure. Maybe we should take a line from the old Navy recruitment posters: become a Jesuit and see the world. In terms of degrees, my undergraduate work was in sociology from Loyola of the South in New Orleans, which was followed by a master's in Latin American studies at the University of Texas at Austin. Then, after my seminary or theological studies in Berkeley, I was sent to do a licentiate and doctorate in missiology at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, a place where, after the second glass of wine, I became quite fluent in what was supposedly Italian, only to be chided by the brother next to me. Quello non è italiano, è spagnolo, spagnolo, spagnolo. C'est la vie. The bulk of what I'm going to share with you about how some of us are doing theology today, not just studying it, is taken from the Graduate Theological Union annual Distinguished Professor Lecture I was invited to give last November at this ecumenical and interreligious consortium centered in Berkeley, one in which our School of Theology participates. Many of the Jesuits who have served there at your parish of St. Ignatius over the years have studied here with us, as well as some of your staff members, such as Maggie. As I mentioned for this morning's lecture, which should go a little over a half hour, I have chosen to speak on how memory, heart, and community all play key roles in the theological enterprise. In Spanish, we often speak of haciendo memoria, which literally translates as doing memory. This memory making goes beyond simply putting together a list of past events toward a deeper, richer contemplation on how we have been blessed to be connected with the vision that inspired those who went before us in putting together this consortium. Those who dare to dream that Sikhs, Hindus, Buddhists, Jewish people, Christian, Muslims, and people of goodwill who profess no religious affiliation could all study under one blessed canopy, respectfully listening to each other's experiences of the sacred, while at the same time working towards renewing the face of the planet, our common home, especially significant now given our current climate crisis, racial tensions, and pandemic. I hope that this Haciendo Memoria will allow me to share with you a deep history and legacy of blessings spanning now almost 6 decades, while also allowing us to raise questions about the role of theology in the formation of a more just society. First, I will briefly describe what might be called a theology of haciendo memoria. Then I will wax nostalgic down Graduate Theological Union memory lane, sharing some cherished memories of our community, past and present. And finally, we will conclude our time travel together with reflections on our diversity, unity, and commitment to service as blessings of our legacy, as well as spaces for growth that now invite us to form a stronger, even more blessed future together. As anyone who has ever taken a class with me can attest, I, like my father, love stories. I love their deep texture, how they draw us in, how they engage a methodology that is more inductive than deductive. Their appeal to metaphor and to mystery, all especially appropriate as we here located on Holy Hill do theology. Or as the Dominican Gustavo Gutierrez reminds us, God talk. As he put it, talk about God, theology, comes after the silence of prayer and commitment. Stories by their nature do not come out of a vacuum. Quite the contrary. They are connected with communities and have a way of bringing people and communities together. For one story elicits another. Take, for example, the visual story in this image painted by El Paso artist Magda Garcia and her nephew, Alex Rodriguez. Magda designed this work for the 100th anniversary celebration of Sacred Heart Church in El Paso, which is only 2 blocks from the US-Mexico border, tidily knit, Año del Barrio, Year of the Neighborhood. As she told me the story of its composition, especially how they sought to bring heaven and earth together into one person, reaching out to us, I marveled at how, if they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, art can often convey what mere words cannot. I love this image, not just because it is the cover of my first book, but also because it represents a coming together of 2 very different worlds. In fact, countries in a concrete, embodied community wrapped in light despite the darkness of forces which threaten to divide it. I wouldn't be surprised if, for example, during this pandemic, we all find ourselves more reflective, trying to take in both the day-to-day details we can no longer take for granted, and yet also surveying, lovingly I hope, the big picture. As Alex Garcia Rivera, a GTU professor of happy memory, would say, the little stories which make up part of the big story. Today, we speak of the need to do theology contextually, in context. What exactly does that mean? This is where tradition, or looking back, so as to understand where we have been, where we are, and where we might be going, is indispensable. With this in mind, I propose that we engage stories this morning to do this type of contextual theology, one which privileges thick, provocative, high context, metaphorical description, which is quite circular in logic as opposed to more abstract, analytical, linear thinking, which is more deductive than inductive. Hacer memoria means that you work hard at remembering, and not just remembering mentally, but as Uruguayan historian Eduardo Galeano reminds us, in Spanish, to recordar, to remember by remembering through the heart, recalling both the good times and the bad. Not exactly the stuff of cute Valentines or emojis, even today on Valentine's Day. Wholeheartedly, through the heart. Sometimes our hearts are broken, but we still do memoria. Through the heart means that we should not put aside passionate feelings and holy desires as we reflect theologically on this centuries-old walk of faith, a faith which sustained our ancestors, as unrecognizable as it might seem sometimes. The African-American theologian Dwight N. Hopkins, who identifies a Black theology of liberation in Toni Morrison's novels, filled with examples of poor Black women's spirituality, writes the following in his book, Shoes That Fit Our Feet. Like a natural spring in the rich soils of the Black Belt South, theology of African-American folk culture gushes forth in all directions. Waters of self-identity and self-affirmation spew out and blanket the Black earth. Poetry, plays, work songs, folk tales, blues, short stories, autobiographies, sermons, toasts, ballads, personal narratives, and protest literature blossom. Here, showered with the wealth of colorful, distinctive material, a poor people name and claim themselves with the flowers of new definitions and positive assertions. I will now share a little bit about what I took away from these past months of revisiting what happens here at the GTU, the Graduate Theological Union. Why it is that we do what we do, and more so, why it is that we can do what we do. And where did my heart, mi corazoncito, go when I tried to make memory? Our campuses with their classrooms, open spaces, libraries, and places of worship soon flooded my imagination. I had plenty to recall, given my 27-year-long and counting affiliation with this place we call home. 3 years at JSTB with your pastor, Father Bonfilio. As an MDiv student, we both were students here, as he mentioned at the end of Mass. And now in my 24th year as faculty. This past year, our own Jesuit School of Theology marked its 50th anniversary of accepting the invitation to join this unique consortium. Having moved from a rural, more monastic setting to this urban center, 2 blocks from one of the most prestigious universities in the world, the University of California at Berkeley, we were blessed in 2009 to become part of Santa Clara University, a partnership which has brought with it new possibilities. I mustn't ignore the role that the University of San Francisco, your own campus here across the bay, played in the renewal of theological studies for many after Vatican II, especially for sisters and priests. Every now and then, especially when I am officiating in some capacity as a Roman Catholic priest and theologian, someone expresses surprise that I teach at Berkeley. Berkeley? Berkeley? That radical place? You Jesuits really have a school of theology there? But as our founder, Ignatius of Loyola, gradually discovered, an important spiritual work is to find God in all things, and all things in God. Schools and universities often become unique places for this quest. Indeed, with its diversity of religious traditions, what better place to engage in this blessed pursuit than here at the Graduate Theological Union? On November 16th, 1989, soon after the ruthless assassination of 6 Jesuits and Elba the cook, and Selena, her 16-year-old daughter, at the University of Central America in El Salvador, the great Robert McAfee Brown, who taught here at the Pacific School of Religion and had served as a Protestant observer at Vatican II, spoke words of consolation and challenge to us at an evening prayer service we had at one of our Jesuit residences. Joined by other GTU friends during the time when we felt so powerless, not to mention complicit, as we knew the US government was supporting the army that carried out this atrocity and many others, as we were learning from our friends, the Salvadoran refugees. Yet, we were also able to feel consolados, consoled, comforted, strengthened, empowered to continue to fight the good fight. We didn't feel alone that night because in our pain, we were being held in the arms of our loving, compassionate, interfaith, and prophetic GTU community. This year's anniversary, back in November, is particularly poignant as recently, after 31 years, a Spanish court finally convicted the perpetrators of this heinous crime, sending a clear global message in defense of human rights and social justice. An important part of this lecture came about serendipitously. When you start having multiple copies of the same book on your shelves, you realize that it's time to clean out your office. Okay, I haven't exactly done that, but by the grace of God, I have made some progress during this pandemic. In going through hard copies of theses and dissertations in which I served as either director or reader, I pondered these memories of our shared work in my heart. As I looked at the spreadsheet of theses and dissertations, I discovered close to 150 works, which covered a wide variety of topics by students from 34 countries. 34 countries. Every continent except Antarctica. How was this possible? As students from different countries began to discover their own voice and become more cognizant that the communities from which they came were already in their own way doing theology, they helped us assemble a savvy dissertation committee, Among these, a significant number of international scholars, each of us bringing our own passion and expertise to the project. It quickly became clear to me that if I were to direct or be part of a dissertation committee, I could only do so by learning from this type of interdisciplinary and at times interreligious wisdom. Some of these dissertations later creatively morphed into books. The composition of our student body also brought its surprises. While as a Latino theologian, before coming here to teach, I imagined that most of the projects in which I would participate would either be about Latinx persons in the United States or Latin Americans. I was amazed to discover that a far greater number actually had been related to Asian and African countries. This international diversity still amazes me because as a junior scholar at the GTU, I was blessed with excellent mentors who showered me with the power of intercultural interdisciplinarity. Despite the very challenging times in which we find ourselves, survivors remind us of the importance of looking back, taking in the big picture, and counting our blessings. As together we envision a new tomorrow, even though, to be honest, I do not always feel it in my heart of hearts, I am convinced that as our faith traditions will affirm, despite the seemingly chaotic times in which we find ourselves, we must not lose sight of significant dawning opportunities before us. After all, it's always darkest before the dawn. These are not only times for savoring the values of diversity, unity, and service, but now is also a time for continuing to work tirelessly to make them a reality. Haciendo memoria and envisioning tomorrow in this way honors the religious traditions of our ancestors. This cloud of witnesses, some of whom sing today, we've walked this far by faith. By immersing ourselves in the sacred texts, spiritual practices, and liberative movements of our communities, we open ourselves to conversion, not in the sense of trying to convince ourselves that others are wrong and we are right, but in the Lonerganian notion of conversion as the expansion of horizons, deeper engagement, more inclusive encounters. Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, the founders of the United Farm Workers in the 1960s, right here in California, epitomized this can-do notion in Justice's famous battle cry, "Sí se puede, sí se puede," or as President Barack Obama adapted it, "Yes, we can. Yes, we can." Isn't this what we are hearing from our hardworking dreamers, undocumented youth who already are serving this great country? A daughter of Mexican immigrants who teaches second grade recently asked her mother how she was able to survive the hardships associated with coming to this country at a young age. Her mother's answer went right to the point. Because our dreams for our children were greater than our fears. We are who we are because of our ancestors' sacrifice. I would like to bring to conclusion my presentation by showing how the three values named above, diversity, unity, and service, can continue to not only be blessings for us here at the GTU community and other theological centers, but also pose challenges for a new era. First, diversity. A review of these 150 or so theses and dissertations in which I was blessed to participate demonstrate an embrace of this ideal. At the GTU, diversity itself assumes a panoply of forms. For example, doing contextual theology from international perspectives, engaging interdisciplinarity, interculturality, interreligious dialogue, and now interreligious theology, which maintains that people of other faiths can help deepen our own. Diversity at the GTU has broadened our horizons beyond our wildest imaginations. At the same time, we must not just pat ourselves on the back and rest on our laurels. A good question for us at the GTU to contemplate as we prepare our students to teach and minister in the not too distant future is, to what extent does our faculty or even our student body reflect the diversity found in our faith communities? The ticket for president and vice president that is perhaps the most diverse to run for the offices has just received the most votes of any ticket in US history. The oldest person to occupy the office of president and the first woman, first Black woman, first woman of South Asian descent, and first woman of immigrant parents have just been elected our president and vice president. Despite the challenges of 2020, let us give thanks and celebrate the fact that there indeed has never been a better time than now to unite and embrace our diversity. So many of us have been horrified to witness the lack of unity in our countries, as serious chasms fomented by political, economic, racial, ethnic, and religious divisions boil at the surface. In our country, the so-called culture wars continue to haunt us, as we often find ourselves not being able to speak to family or friends who beg to differ from our own stances on these life issues. A real grace for me being here at the GTU is to struggle with trying to remain open to the faith conviction of others, especially if I have not first made the effort to get to know what these convictions are from their words, not simply from what people say about them. Considering the attention we give to studying sacred text, imagine, for example, what a Christian student can learn from a Jewish professor about the Psalms, which Jesus himself, Yeshua, a Jew, fervently prayed. At the core of our name, the Graduate Theological Union, we unite. The arts, similarly, can continue to work their magic in bringing us together as we simply open ourselves to a renewed conversion experience. As I wrote recently for our GTU Center for the Arts and Religion website, among the greatest contribution the GTU can continue to make to world communities is a deep appreciation of the ecumenical and interreligious as it relates to lived religion, whether that of today or centuries past. Material culture communicates in surprising ways how religion and spirituality cannot be understood if not communicated through the senses, a type of bridge from the concrete to the abstract. As the divine is often experienced through beauty, St. Augustine's, "O ancient beauty, late have I loved you." The long tradition of the arts at our consortium has taught us that by experience and appreciating each other's art forms, blended together harmoniously, whether through the spoken word, visual art, music, dance, architecture, crafts, or cuisines, we allow ourselves to be invited into the sacred in an embodied, holistic way. I know that you there at St. Ignatius even have a beautiful art gallery, Manresa, located right within one of your church naves. Divisions start to give way as we experience the divine spark in each of us. I experienced this holiness when, thanks to our professor of Islamic studies, Munir Jiwa, I reflected on his explanation of the Muslim art Salma Arastu's work being displayed in our library, and found myself writing about it for a sacred scripture reflection blog the next day. Finally, the third and final vision, service. The word which most often comes to mind when I think of my past and present students is scholar practitioner. Many come to us with vast experience of having worked in ministerial settings, teaching, doing advocacy work, social workers, medical professionals, etc., realizing that what they need, that they needed not only to renew and grow academically, but also to bring these fonts of communal wisdom to theological forums. At the same time, these women and men remind us again and again that in our scholarship and teaching, we have to be accountable not only to our professional academic guild, but also to the communities from where these theologies are emerging. Several of our indigenous scholars over the years, for example, have challenged the notion that the Western way of thinking, heavy on the rational, is the only way to think. Hence my stress on the Spanish hacer memoria, doing memory, and recordar, or remembering with its nuances, referring to heart, beauty, and community, so as to remember, keeping someone or something in mind, which of course ultimately engages our heart. But we should not limit this embodiment of service to professors and students. Our staff persons and administrators are angels in human form. As Brother Manny in our El Paso Jesuit community once remarked, "My job, like a good mechanic, is to keep the planes flying." I love walking over to the registrar with a student who has just defended her or his thesis or dissertation, for instance, to see the joy of administrators and staff as they personally congratulate those who have demonstrated by their hard work that sí se puede, yes, we can. not being a good fundraiser myself, I equally have great respect for those who beg on our behalf, helping donors practice good stewardship with the blessings they have received. Could it be then that we can do what we do because, as the previously quoted immigrant mother commented, because our dreams for a better world are greater than our fears? Whether through feeding the folks at People's Park on a Sunday morning, encountering the homeless face to face, and discovering that they have much to teach us as we advocate for affordable housing, serving as chaplains in prisons, hospitals, congregations, shelters for migrants and refugees, and university campuses, or designing programs to teach religious literacy in community colleges. Ours is a holy work, one which draws from the best of our religious traditions, blessed by the harvest inherited from those who went before us. Let us continue to unite in our diversity and serve others as we learn together. After all, in the words of Rumi, the 13th century mystic poet, we are all just walking each other home. Thank you. Muchas gracias. Before taking your questions, we have a little time before noon to take some questions. I want to publicly thank Albert Douglas Marquis Honnigan. He not only is assisting us here and helping us to connect with you, but he also generously helped me in the preparation of this talk. I'm very grateful. I'm also grateful to Father John Coleman and Robert Nolan, and also to Lucy, who has been our moderator. So I'm just going to leave the ambo here and go sit over here by the chair. And if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll address with the time that we have.
Hello, am I muted?
Pardon me?
I'm trying, am I muted?
No, you're on.
I
I hear you.
Yeah, Eduardo, I apologize profusely. I've had problems with my computer, and I had the damnedest time getting on in time, and then all of a sudden I got all this sound in it, so I closed it off. So I'm sorry. I mean, I tried to get here around 2 minutes after 11, but my computer has been, I've ordered a new one, but I've got to deal with this one for a while anyway. Sorry.
No worries, John. No, I still felt your support.
I heard part of your talk, and then anyway.
No worries. Thank you, John. Thank you. I appreciate again you inviting me. You know, maybe for the sake of time, I'm looking here. As usual, you know, time goes faster than we think it does, and so I had timed this at 30 minutes, but I guess I went slower than I did in my practice. But you know, if somebody wants to ask a question, please feel free to do so in the chat, and don't be shy. If I don't know the answer, after all, I'm a professor, I make it up. Not that John ever did this in class, but. Or comments also, if you have a comment or an impression.
No, I would like to just comment on Lucy.
Sure, Lucy.
And I didn't do the chat thing, but I wanted to say, you inspired me. All the books that you put up on the screen. I mean, there were just a few, and I imagine like you have an amazing library of books of this kind. And I'm wondering if there's like a reading list that you use with your students, you know, that we can get a glimpse at, or.
Sure, sure. I mean, actually, those books are books that were dissertations that I was privileged to work on, and they became books. So that was very consoling to me. They're in a very prized place on my bookshelf because I'm thinking, wow. But there are some other books. I mean, I think this Hopkins book on shoes that fit our
Yeah,
feet.
that looks fascinating to me. I want to read that.
Yeah, because, again, we often don't think about that novels can provide stuff to theologize from, that Negro spirituals can provide stuff to theologize from. And that's what's very exciting to me, that our students more and more are taking material culture and they are theologizing from that, because that's lived religion. Most people are not weird like us theologians, that we become so abstract. Most people live religion, they just live it. And so it's really important for us to see, what theology is in this material culture. But thank you, Lucy. Thank you for getting us started there. I see here, Therese, let's see, she's, okay. So she's saying that she wonders how the GT relates to the blatant misinterpretation of biblical texts, whether to serve political ends or to bring the coming of Jesus. So much of the Hebrew Bible speaks in the voice of a tribal God, which we continue to listen to uncritically. What do you suggest we do with that? Again, I'm not a biblical scholar, but I will say that I'm very encouraged to see these kinds of things being challenged by people who, first of all, know the language, by people who are in discussion with post-colonialism, for example, of people who read different methods. One of our professors here, Jenna Hens Piazza, is always looking for who are the people that are not mentioned or the people we haven't put the spotlight on. Also, as we get more diverse students, I mean, for me, it's fascinating to see, just to have women who are biblical scholars. There are all these women in Scripture I never noticed, but because they saw them, now they're bringing them to the fore. So I think perspective is a very helpful thing, and also bringing in other disciplines like race critical theory, post-colonialism. Michael is saying, can you talk a little bit about factions within the church who might not be so willing to embrace diversity and unity, particularly the anti-Francis factions? Really good point. Really good point. I have a friend who, when she heard this lecture, she got very angry at me. And it's difficult because there are a lot of differences. They're real. It's not just some abstract concept. But this is where history is so important. It's like when people say, I'm a traditionalist, I favor Latin. Well, Latin is not the that's and before we had it in Latin, we had it in other languages. So there's nothing like a good dose of history, I find. And for people who are open-minded and willing to listen, I find that it really changes our perspective, and also it helps us to think about other perspectives. Another thing about how do we the fear of one's own identity loss when approaching diversity? Is for all of us to do our own work, our own cultural work. Sadly, often in the US, we have what one of our students who has since written a book, he was on Brett Hoover. He teaches at LMU. He was studying a parish in the Midwest that was predominantly more German American, becoming more Latino. And one of the things Brett writes about is immigrant amnesia. We forget so quickly. I'm amazed, of my 4 grandparents, 3 were born in Mexico. But often when I start to talk to other people, they have similar stories. And so we have to do, that's why this ancestry.com and all these sites, they're important. We should know our history, our family history, our cultural history. And often I find that students who take even my Latino classes, there's some things there, and you'll hear something like, you know, professor, they say my grandmother was Native American, but we never spoke about that. So think about that, like, why should we be ashamed of where we come from? Um, Another one is, oh, wonderful. Reminds me of Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Yes, again, it's so exciting, this kind of exchange, this interdisciplinary that is happening. And you know what? I think one of the things that's really exciting is the study of religion, not necessarily belonging to a religious group, is only increasing. There's state universities now that are opening departments of religion. One of our doctoral students is working in a community college teaching religious diversity and literacy, because he says one of the reasons why we have all these tensions is we don't know each other's traditions. And so they have to take a class in this, and this is nearby in Sacramento. It seems that in our attempts to be diverse, how much does atonement matter, or does it? I think that, how would I put it? I think some of us, because part of it is because of the way we look, our genotype, in some ways have to deal more with diversity than certain people who migrate to this country and more easily are seen as, oh, you're American. Or I have an exercise in which I ask the students to name their culture, and some will just say American. And I think, okay, yeah, I'm American too. Mexicans are Americans. Central Americans are Americans, etc. So what does this say? What I find is that I have a friend who is Japanese American, and they'll ask her, where are you from? She says, I'm from Chicago. Where are you really from? I'm from Chicago, she said. My grandfather was from Japan, but I'm from Chicago. So I think there's something about some of us have more explaining to do. And I think that it's really important for us all to tell our story. And one of the concerns that I have sometimes is that sometimes middle-class whites in the US, if I may generalize to that, sometimes something has been told to them about your story is not exciting. You know, you're boring, you're Mickey Mouse, you're white bread. You don't have this exciting story. I remember a student in class once said, she said, I feel like I don't have a culture. Latinos have a culture, blacks have a culture, Asians have a culture. What am I? I have no culture. I'm just a white woman. She said, that's why I cling to my Catholicism, because it gives me identity. Remember, the dialogue of faith and culture is really important. And you know what I think is exciting? As we do our history, then we discover I have some friends who are Italian American, and they say that as they work more with refugees, they start to ask themselves, really, it isn't like all of us always had papers here. What is WHOP, that racial slur? Where does that come from? It's without papers. And you see the same thing on the border, you know, immigrant amnesia. Immigrant amnesia. The amount of people who are in support of some of Trump's policies who are Latinos is scary to me. Immigrant amnesia. We have to tell our story. One person writes, I learned the most about Jewish community by studying with a rabbi in their community. Isn't that beautiful?
That was me, Father. Adele.
Please, Adele, please tell us.
I went I went to I saw in the newspaper an advertisement for the College of Judaic Study in San Francisco. And it just kind of perked me, and I have always loved the Psalms, so I showed up. And the rabbi said, he said to me, "What brought you here?" And I said, "What brought me here is because I want to understand the spiritual journey of your community."
Yes, yes.
And I was studying cross-cultural communications in nursing at the
Mhm.
time.
Mm.
And I said, I can only understand by entering into your community and understanding its history. And he wrote me, after I wrote a small paper, he wrote, "You have gone," in Hebrew, "you have gone above and beyond the law."
Thank you, Adele. Thank you. Now think about the power of language. When I was putting this talk together, I thought I cannot ignore that other part of me. You know, there's parts that sometimes I just have to speak in Spanish. Sometimes when I pray, that for me is closer to the language of the heart, even though I grew up bilingual. And think about different communities. Now, 1/3 of all our US parishes are shared parishes with different racial and ethnic groups. 1/3. In California, I'm sure it's a lot more. Maggie gave an excellent presentation in my intercultural ministry class. Maggie, who's there on the staff at St. Ignatius, and she showed the diversity that's in your parish, the diversity in San Francisco. Again, think about the power of language. There's a saying in Spanish, and with this I'm going to end. Traductore traditore. Translators are traitors. Because ultimately, when you translate, you have to interpret, right? There's some things you just cannot say. So Barbara's saying that these presentations of the last months have been remarkably helpful, consoling, and inspiring. Thanks be to God. I think we've run out of time. I really want to, this is Valentine's Day, lots of chocolate and just hugs, even if they're virtual hugs. But and in Latin America, we call this El Día de la Amistad, the Day of Friendship. So I'm delighted to have spent this time with you, and I'm feeling very encouraged by you, your questions, your attention, your words, your community. So let's continue to pray for each other, and all the best. Namaste. The holiness in me, the spirit in me salutes the holiness in you. I remember Mother Teresa did this to me as we escorted her out of the parking lot in Rome. So namaste. God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Father Fernandez. It really has been a treat to have you here with us this morning, and you're very inspiring.